I didn't mean to fall asleep on her couch. Really, I didn't. But the repair shop had run late. The hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of tools scraping metal still ringing in my ears, and her living room smelled of something warm, like cinnamon and old books, and I hadn't moved from the couch before my eyes just closed. I woke to a weight over me. A blanket. Thick, soft, the kind that smelled faintly of lavender. My first thought was confusion, then embarrassment, because I was sprawled awkwardly, one arm dangling off the side, like a kid who'd been caught napping in class. "Good night," a voice said. Low, amused, gentle. I froze. Her sister. Of course. She was standing there, half-smile, holding her hands in front of her like she was performing some small act of ceremony. I didn't know if she'd seen me sleeping like that, stupid, vulnerable, but she didn't look judgmental, only aware. And for a heartbeat, I wondered what it would feel like if it had been her saying that instead. I pulled the blanket closer to my shoulders, avoiding her eyes. Thanks," I mumbled, my voice too loud in the quiet room. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused by my awkwardness, and didn't say anything else. Just left the blanket resting on me and stepped back into the hallway. The click of her heels faded, and then the silence hit. Not empty, heavy, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the faint scratches of sunlight on the floorboards, the hum of the radiator, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I realized I could still feel it, the warmth of the blanket against my skin, the weight of her sister's small kindness. But it wasn't the blanket I remembered. It was the way she looked at her sister for just a second before she smiled. Confident, unbothered, radiant in a way that made the room feel smaller. Like she belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. I hadn't really met her properly yet. Not in a way that mattered. She moved around the room with easy authority, adjusting books on the shelf, laughing softly at something I didn't hear. She had this way of taking up space without trying, like she'd memorized the geometry of every room she walked into and left it exactly where it should be. And every time she glanced at me, just for a second, I felt like I'd been caught in some private current I wasn't ready for. I tried to focus on my phone, the text from my friend about tomorrow's shift, anything to distract myself. But my eyes kept flicking back to her, to the way her hand lingered on the edge of the bookshelf before moving away, to the faint crease at the corner of her mouth when she laughed, and, embarrassingly, to the memory of her sister tucking the blanket over me and whispering those words. Good night. It shouldn't have stayed with me, not like this. A few seconds. A minor act. But I could still feel the warmth radiating from the blanket, and I could still see her shadow in the doorway, like she had somehow leaned into the room and left a trace behind that wasn't hers to leave. I shifted, careful not to disturb the blanket too much, and wondered if I'd ever get a chance to say something to her. Something normal, something that didn't make me sound like a fool. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the faint patch of sunlight on the floor and realized I hadn't stopped thinking about her smile the entire time. And I knew that I would keep thinking about it, long after the blanket was gone, long after the repair shop had called me back to work, long after I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Because something about her, something subtle, electric, unspoken, had already caught me. And I wouldn't let it go. I was supposed to be helping her sort through boxes in the old bookstore she'd inherited from her mother. The kind of task that promised dust, cobwebs, and a mild backache. But somehow, the moment I stepped inside, the smell of old paper and coffee hit me in a way that made me forget everything but her. She was perched on a ladder, dusting the top shelf, hair loosely tied back, glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Every movement was deliberate, careful, like she had her own rhythm, one that didn't quite include anyone else. I lingered near the corner, picking up a stack of books she'd set aside, pretending to be busy, but really just watching. Her hands caught my attention first. Long, strong, but gentle. Fingers that had clearly spent years handling everything from ledgers to delicate paperbacks. And when she paused, just for a second, to rub the ache out of her wrist, I noticed the small tremor in her hand. She hadn't said a word, hadn't asked for help, but I felt it. Her fatigue, subtle but undeniable. You don't have to do all of that yourself. I said quietly, more than half hoping she wouldn't answer. She glanced down at me from the ladder, eyes briefly flickering with something, annoyance, hesitation, before she shrugged. I'll be fine, she said, voice clipped, almost rehearsed. But then she paused, as if reconsidering, and added, softer this time, "It's just easier to do it my way." I nodded, letting the silence stretch. There was something in that pause, a vulnerability she didn't want me to see, but I did anyway. And I found myself smiling at the faint curve of her lips as she turned back to the books, trying to hide a yawn. I moved closer to the shelf she was dusting, careful not to crowd her, careful not to breathe too loudly. My fingers brushed the spine of a book she had just adjusted, and I noticed the faint scent of her, something warm, faintly floral, lingering in the air. It shouldn't have affected me, but it did. It made the quiet between us feel charged. A sudden crash of a stack of books made me flinch. She laughed, a sound that was light but edged with exhaustion, and it sent an odd pulse through my chest. She leaned back, gripping the ladder for balance, and for a moment, her eyes met mine. That glance, quick, fleeting, was enough to make my pulse speed. "Be careful," I said, though my voice was barely above a whisper. "I know," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But she lingered a second too long, just enough for me to notice the tiny flicker of tension in her jaw, the way her shoulders seemed to sag under some invisible weight. We went back to the boxes, working in silence. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet was louder than words. Every small movement of hers, every glance, every subtle sigh, was telling me something I wasn't supposed to understand. At one point, I reached over to steady a leaning stack of books, and our hands brushed. Just a second. Not long enough for anything to be said, but long enough for a charge to pass between us. She didn't pull away immediately, but she didn't meet my eyes either. And when she finally stepped down from the ladder, I realized I couldn't stop watching the way her shoulders relaxed for a moment, how tired she really was, and how alive she seemed in that exhaustion. I wondered if she even noticed how carefully I'd been watching, or if I was just another shadow in her day. But I knew one thing. That fleeting touch, that small, silent acknowledgement, had already rooted itself in my mind, and I wouldn't be able to forget it. The rain started just as I was leaving her apartment, tapping lightly against the windows like it wanted to eavesdrop. She had invited me to help organize some paperwork, and somehow we ended up on the floor with piles of invoices and old photographs, surrounded by the smell of wet concrete from the street below and the faint aroma of her jasmine candle. She was sitting closer than necessary, legs tucked under her, hair falling loosely across one shoulder. I could see the tension in her hands as she sorted the papers, and for some reason I wanted to reach out, not to touch, not yet, but to ease it. Instead, I kept my hands in my lap, hovering over nothing, pretending to scan the pages. "Do you ever wonder about what you could have done differently?" she asked suddenly, voice quiet, almost hesitant, as though she were testing the air before speaking. I froze. The question sounded casual, but the way she avoided looking at me made it something else entirely, something fragile. I wanted to answer honestly, but the words lodged in my throat. So I nodded, and she let it pass. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, casting shadows under her eyes. She looked tired, older somehow, yet luminous in that dim light. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach out, to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but I didn't. I didn't because I could feel the weight of her restraint, the invisible line she drew around herself. The soft vibration of her phone on the floor startled both of us. She glanced at the screen, a text from someone named Daniel. Her ex, probably. She hesitated, then silenced it without opening it, a subtle sigh escaping her lips. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but I swallowed the words. It wasn't my place. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking how small and human she looked in that moment, managing everything on her own. I moved just slightly closer to pass her a stack of papers, and our knees brushed. Not a touch, not really, but enough to spark a current neither of us acknowledged. She didn't pull back, though I could see her body stiffen, shoulders tensing. I kept my eyes on the paperwork, pretending nothing happened, even though every nerve in me wanted to glance up, wanted to see her face, wanted to understand what she might be feeling. The storm rumbled, and the room seemed to shrink around us. Her hand lingered near mine for a moment while reaching for a binder. I didn't move, didn't pull away, but didn't move closer either. We were suspended in that silence, inches apart, sharing a space that felt almost intimate without a single word acknowledging it. "I think that's it for tonight," she said finally, her voice soft, almost breaking the spell. She rose, folding her arms as though to protect herself, to regain the barrier we'd both been dancing around. I felt a tug in my chest, an urge to say something I knew I couldn't, to admit that even in this quiet storm, with her so near and the world pressing in around us, I wanted more. But instead, I just nodded, helping her carry the last few papers to the shelf, careful not to brush her hands again. And when she turned toward me, smiling faintly as she said goodnight, I realized how sharp the near miss had been, how close we had been, almost touching, almost saying what neither of us dared. I stepped back, feeling the heat of that moment linger longer than the storm itself, and I knew I wouldn't stop thinking about it. The room was quiet in a way that felt heavy, like it had been holding its breath for hours. We'd been sitting across from each other at her small kitchen table, the remnants of takeout between us, neither of us touching a fork. Outside, the street lamps flickered through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor, and I could see the faint shake in her hand as she traced the rim of her coffee mug. "Do you ever just stop and think about what this is?" she asked finally, voice low, almost breaking. She didn't meet my eyes, only stared at the table, at the scattered napkins, at the tiny chips in the wooden surface. I swallowed. The question wasn't new. I'd felt it too, but hearing it out loud made it sharper, more urgent. I don't know," I admitted, keeping my voice quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I wanted to fill the space, to reassure her, but nothing felt right. She looked up then, and the vulnerability in her eyes hit me in a way nothing else had. It wasn't weakness. It was honesty, raw and unfiltered, and it made me catch my breath. She was beautiful like this, but in a human, almost painful way. "I feel like we're doing something we shouldn't," she continued, and I could hear the tremor in her words. "Or maybe we're doing nothing at all. I can't tell anymore." I wanted to say something clever, something comforting, but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, letting the silence stretch between us. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her eyes dropping again. "It's stupid," she whispered, "but I can't pretend it doesn't matter. And yet, I don't even know what it is." I wanted to reach across the table, to grab her hand, to say, "I get it, I feel it too," but I couldn't. There was a line neither of us had drawn, but it existed, invisible, and it kept us from collapsing the distance in front of us. "I think I've been trying to pretend everything's fine," I finally admitted, voice low, hesitant. "But it's not, and I don't know how to make it stop, or if I even want to." Her breath hitched slightly. She didn't respond immediately, just looked at me, really looked, and for a moment I thought she might crumble under the intensity of it. Instead, she just shook her head, a sad little smile tugging at her lips. We can't just act normal anymore," she said, almost to herself. The words hung in the air, and I realized she was right. Something had shifted, something quiet, but undeniable. The playful glances, the small touches, the hours spent in each other's presence. All of it had built a weight that neither of us could ignore. And then she said it, the line that made the room feel impossibly small. "I'm scared that if I let myself feel it, I'll lose control of everything I thought I knew about myself." The vulnerability in her voice, the honesty in her eyes, left me breathless. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that it was human, that I felt the same, but all I could do was watch her, listen, and feel the quiet devastation that had settled between us. We didn't speak again that night. Not really. But the silence had said everything. I was stacking books in the corner when she walked in holding a small photo album, edges frayed, spine cracked. The rain had stopped, leaving streaks of water on the window pane that caught the afternoon light in tiny, dizzying patterns. She didn't say anything at first, just set it on the table between us, fingers lingering on the cover like it was fragile, like it might shatter if she let go too quickly. "I haven't looked at these in years," she murmured, voice low, almost afraid. She flipped the first page slowly. Black and white photographs stared back at us. Her younger self laughing at some long-ago vacation, her parents smiling, a man I didn't recognize standing next to her. I crouched down beside her, careful not to crowd her, careful not to ask. But I noticed the way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she turned each page, and the faint hitch in her breath when her eyes lingered on one particular photo. "That was a long time ago," she said finally, not looking at me, not wanting me to see the shadows in her eyes. Her voice cracked just a little, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. I waited. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't need to. There was a weight in the air that demanded patience. He died," she said, her fingers brushing over the photo as if she could smooth the years back into something safer. "I loved him. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with him. And then it just ended. Suddenly. And somehow, I've spent the last 20 years pretending it didn't break me." Her eyes finally met mine, glossy but strong, and for a moment, I felt my own chest tighten. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't trying to draw me in. She was just telling me something she hadn't said aloud in decades. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach out, but I stayed frozen, my hand resting on my knee, wanting to respect the distance she needed, while simultaneously wishing I could erase the ache in her expression. "I didn't tell anyone for a long time," she continued, softer now. "Not my friends, not my family. I just carried it, like it was part of me that no one else could touch." I swallowed. It was strange how suddenly everything in the room shifted. The way the sunlight caught her hair, the subtle tilt of her head, the fragile strength in her voice. I wanted to say something, anything, but instead I just nodded, letting her words sink in. Then she closed the album slowly, exhaling as if she had been holding her breath all these years. "I guess I'm telling you this because I don't want to hide anymore, but also because I don't know how to carry it alone anymore." Her confession hung between us like a live wire. I felt my chest tighten, my thoughts scattered. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, she placed the album in my hands. "I want you to see him," she said, a small, vulnerable smile breaking through. "Even if it's just once." I looked down at the photo in my hands, at the man who had meant everything to her, and for a second, I felt the world tilt. Not because of the photo itself, but because she had trusted me with it. And as she sat there, watching me, I realized how fragile, how real, how human she was, and how much it made me want to be careful and present, and maybe, somehow, the one to hold her steady this time. We didn't speak for a long time after the photo album, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had been said in the act of sharing it. I sat on the couch, careful not to crowd her, and she perched on the armrest, knees drawn close, hands folded loosely in her lap. The afternoon sun had shifted, spilling golden light across the room, warming the edges of our silence. I could feel her breathing, steady but slightly uneven, and it reminded me of every small detail I'd noticed about her since the first day. The way her shoulders relaxed when she was tired, the faint crease in her brow when she concentrated, the way she moved around a room like it had always been hers. "I didn't think anyone could understand," she said softly, almost to herself. I glanced at her, but she wasn't looking at me. She never quite looked at me when saying things that mattered. "I'm glad you let me," I said, voice careful. Too careful. The words felt like stepping onto ice, unsure whether it would hold. Her fingers brushed mine when she shifted on the armrest. Not intentionally, not in a gesture of courage, just incidental, a byproduct of being near. But it sent a spark through me that had nothing to do with magic or fairy tales. It was real, human, quietly seismic. She let out a soft breath, a tiny acknowledgement that whatever had been between us was now something different. Neither of us named it. Neither of us tried. It didn't need a name. I don't want this to be confusing," she said finally. Her voice was steady now, the vulnerability softened into calm. But I also don't want to pretend there isn't something here. I nodded, careful not to break the fragile rhythm of the room. I don't either, I admitted. We stayed like that for a while, side by side but not touching, the quiet hum of the heater filling the gaps between words. The tension that had been building, years of distance, almost confessions, near misses, storms outside, and shared vulnerabilities, had collapsed into a simple understanding. We were no longer pretending. Then, just as the light shifted and caught her hair, my hand brushed hers again. This time, intentionally, but still gentle, respectful. Her fingers didn't pull away. They didn't intertwine either. They just rested together, warm, steady, confirming what had already been said without words. I felt a slow exhale, the kind that releases everything you've been holding in. She did too, I think. And in that shared exhale, there was acknowledgement, acceptance, and quiet surrender. I realized then that the sitting together, the silent acknowledgement, the gentle touch, was what mattered. Not declarations, not promises. Just presence. Just being. She leaned her head slightly toward my shoulder, almost imperceptibly, enough for me to notice but not enough to force an answer. I didn't move. I let her find the comfort she needed. And in letting her, I found mine. We didn't say, "I love you." We didn't need to. The room held that truth quietly, in the warmth of our shared space, in the weight of our hands resting together, in the unspoken agreement that whatever this was, it had finally found its place. And in that stillness, I knew it was enough. I think about that night often. Not the big gestures, not the confessions or the almost moments, but the quiet. The way we just existed in the same space, learning to fit alongside each other without forcing it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was something quieter, slower, more human. And it changed everything. I remember how she looked leaning on the armrest, sunlight catching her hair, hands resting gently on her lap, not reaching for me, but not moving away either. I remember the first time our fingers brushed intentionally, the warmth, the weight of her presence. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't fireworks. It was grounding. And for me, that was more powerful than anything I could have imagined. She changed too. I've watched her let herself be vulnerable in ways she hadn't in years. I saw it first in the photo album, the confession of a past heartbreak that she had carried alone. I saw it in the way she trusted me to just sit with her, to not say the wrong thing, to respect the silence. And slowly, she stopped guarding herself quite so tightly, though never carelessly. She carries strength differently now, softer, layered with trust rather than armor. For me, the shift was quieter, internal. I learned to pause, to notice the little details, the crease in her brow when she's thinking, the way her laugh hesitates before it blooms, the faint scent of her hair when she leans near. I learned to wait, to hold space, to recognize that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives in gentle touches, in shared silences, in the kind of presence that doesn't need words to be understood. Our dynamic isn't perfect. We stumble, misunderstand, and navigate our differences like any two people. But there's a patience now, a recognition that connection is something earned and maintained, not assumed. It's fragile in a way that makes it beautiful, and every quiet moment between us feels deliberate and real. I don't think either of us expected to find this, whatever this is, so unexpectedly, in the midst of life's ordinary rhythms. But it's here, and it's ours, in all its imperfect, quiet glory. And maybe that's what I've learned. Love isn't always a story of dramatic confessions or grand gestures. Sometimes it's the stillness after the storm, the unspoken understanding that two people are willing to keep showing up, again and again, for each other. The thing I remember most, though, isn't anything we said. It's sitting side by side, fingers brushing, watching sunlight shift across the room, realizing that nothing had to change to make everything feel different. That was the moment I understood it, the moment I knew I wouldn't trade it for anything. And now, when I think about her, I think about that quiet presence, that patient love, the way it lingers long after the day ends. It's in those small, unremarkable moments that I see how much has changed, how much we've grown, together and separately, and how something human, real, and unhurried can become everything you need. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?